Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for attending. I'm going to make a deal with you. You will pretend you're an intelligent audience, and I won't read you the slides. I'll assume you read them behind me. Is that okay? Yeah? You're not very sure about whether you're an intelligent audience, or you're not very sure about reading the slides. Come on now. Show some interest. Okay. The goal in this one is to take what is out there, a lot of new technologies, which are complex in their own right, and to try to place them together in a business architectural framework so you understand how they fit together. Where does cloud fit with blockchain? Where does IoT fit with that? Where do service models fit? And what will be the trigger for the transformation of industry that everyone wants to talk about? And if you think it can't happen, then I will point to two examples of what happens if you don't get this model in your mind. The first one is General Electric, which a year ago would have been a poster child at any IoT event for redoing their model. Actually, they didn't. They applied the technology to their current business model, and I think we all know what a high-profile failure that turned out to be. The other one is, why did so many high street famous names in the space of little more than 6 months crumble? That is a transformation impact. Why? Because if you subtract from an enterprise 3, 4, 5, seldom as much as 10% of its revenues, its business model crumbles. What's happened is the high street giants, the retail model of the high street, has crumbled by losing about 5% on average of their sales. At that point, their entire business model doesn't work. They can't cover their costs. They have to either go bust, transform, think, or do something. When any of these models get to that point, the tip is very sudden. So how many of you were around in the 90s when the last major industry transformation into client-server and IoT occurred? Okay? We didn't have IT in those days, did we? Didn't have client-server. Do you remember business process re-engineering? We completely changed the way things operated. And if you didn't take part in the model, your company went bust. So that's what we're going to talk about, and I'm going to try and get this across to you. So the real point about this is individual technologies don't transform. They extend and improve current operations. And as such, they are extraordinarily valuable, and I'm not saying anything against them. But the real point is, every now and then, we get a cluster of technologies that means you can form a new architectural model. And that architectural model means that the existing business model gets extended into a new revenue, a new way of working and thinking. The last time we had it, well, this goes back a bit. We had the PC networking, which gave us client-server, which gave us BPR, and gave us ERP as you understand it today. If you do not run ERP in your business today, you've got some problems about running a business. The internet and web browser started us on a different tack. But what's going to happen now is clouds, IoT, blockchain, they all come together to really change what happens around the edge of an enterprise. Our current use of technology and business model is center out. The new models do edge back. Do they displace each other? No, they don't. No, they don't. They will work in conjunction. So we're talking about a new area of technology. Just as the enterprise computing service, as it used to be, became the data center, and IT became a surround to it. Now we're talking about another surround beyond that. So let's try and describe this. And we're going to describe this by doing buildings. And oddly enough, the building sector has moved pretty quickly just because simple dynamics in it made it possible. What we're talking about here is, here's our building with edge-based events. Now, if you think about a building, you can put sensors all over it and you can do some interesting things. But if you actually say, I want it to be a smart building, a lot of what happens is autonomous within the building. If the temperature goes up and you want the air conditioning turned on, do you send that to a remote data center to be processed and send it back again? You don't. It's processed as an edge-based system. If the impacts between these systems start to occur, then they work it out together. So you have a series of smart services, heating, ventilation, the blinds, security, fire protection, all working together, and they're autonomous. Now think about this one for a moment. Think about what happens if your building catches fire. How comfortable are you with the idea that that's going to go over to a remote data center somewhere to send back a signal to tell you to turn on the sprinklers? Does that make any sense? Someone nod, for God's sake. Come on. Does it make any sense? Right. Think of your car, your driverless car. Someone walks out in front of you. Do you want it to send it back to a remote data center to say, oh, I think you better stop? Right. So what we talk about with this change is events which, if we can detect through new forms of data streams, the things, we can do something within a time span that will alter the outcome. Now, that's not the same as BI. Does that change the need for BI? No, it doesn't. BI has a different function in the structure. We need things to happen on the edge. We need this new world of things giving us data about realities happening in order to respond. Now let's suppose in our building that the air conditioning unit doesn't come on. Well, at that point we've got a problem. So the problem goes to the next load, which is where we start to have the services of who's going to respond and for what reason. Now, service responses are not quite what people think, because this is a really true story in Dubai. And they called out the engineer. The call went that the air conditioning plant didn't come on in one particular area of the building. And the engineer turned out from the company and found himself in a car park with lots and lots of service vans from every other function in that particular area of the company. Why? The electricity supply had failed. Okay? Well, that should be part of the logic that's happening here, where you look to see if that's happened. So when we start evoking services back here, we are now talking about a degree of orchestration between dependencies. This is where AI, I would prefer to call it augmented intelligence, machine learning, starts to provide the, what do I do when I see these things happen? Because we're now talking about huge amounts of events happening and the need to make sense of them in a much more complex way than individual companies getting individual alarms. And then finally back here, the outcome of all of this, we want to know. Back here is where in the center, we do want to do big analysis. We do want to do kind of BI stuff. We do want to do machine learning stuff. We do need to understand what picture did this give? And then it runs the other way, because once we understand machine learning, the characteristics of what happened, we change the deployment of the way we react to the information we're getting. So you can't do one without the other. It's a connected environment that flows across. And if we look at it in a common sense way and give you a couple of quick checks, think about Uber. Uber is a lot of decentralized events, you, the cab, etc., moving around. Back here, the matching takes place, but they also have to match it up with what's the traffic doing? What's the weather doing? Is there an event in your area of town? Which comes from this direction to change the algorithms for how much they'll charge and everything else. Beginning to make sense? It's thinking about the whole thing in a joined up, differentiated way. And in smart cities, we are seeing that happen. Unfortunately, a lot of the really good examples aren't in the UK. The Chinese have 100 cities which are what we would call new cities, which are being planned from ground up to be smart. What does that mean? Well, at a very simple level, the mapping of the town is so detailed. Driverless cars have to have much better mapping than the standard mapping we've got. They're also developing their own GPS, which gives much better accuracy. So if you really want to talk about a scale up, some of these ones are huge. And they're seeing it in terms of what is happening, traffic patterns, car parks, smog, which they transfer into high-value city services, and they abstract the other way to see how they model their city in that environment in order to send it back. Many of these smart services are not provided by the city authority. They let the parking contractor, the transport contractor, whoever you like to think of it of, exist in this zone, but they participate in an ecosystem of supply. All right? Are things beginning to make sense? The problem is we only see it from bit to bit. So that's edge-based. So when we talk about our central IT systems, what we are really talking about is transactional compliance systems. They must exist. You can't do business without being compliant and having those transactional systems. But your challenge is that the edge is now something different. And for those of you who are enterprise architects, this introduces a really, really big problem, because we have trained, and I used to be a TOGAF certified architect many years ago. In fact, I was one of the founders of TOGAF. We've trained everyone on the whole principle of close coupled stateful. Everything I've just described to you is loose coupled. It's things finding each other as and when they need to. And if you think about it, you cannot impose stateful time on all those edge events, circumstances, and objects. It can't work that way. So our basic problem is we can look at the new technologies and we can apply them within the context of our current environment, current architecture, current business models, and we can get improvement. But you don't get that change that we're talking about there until you start to recognize an edge-based model is not part of IT as we know it. It's part of a new wave of technology. Yes, it functions with IT, and I'm most certainly not making a case that IT is dead. It's merely a ring around that changes the model. So we can see our business now going forward using these major points of change, and we've got a new model of digital enterprise on the stateless edge model wrapped around our enterprise IT model of stateful compliant transactions. And the path through that is the value of IoT and things is they give us the type of data we've never had before about the reality of what is happening now in order to apply computing models to it and change outcomes. And do it at a scale that is not possible in stateful close-coupled architecture. It's an internet scale of bringing things together and making them work. And this introduces the real point I want you to grasp. Anybody heard of those three subjects up there? No? Well, go home and Google them because they're hugely important to you, and any of the tech vendors are thinking on these three topics. This is how any major technology vendor you know out there is thinking of the future. And we'll explain them to you. But basically, we've kind of got the front one running. We kind of know online and we know it's made a change. And we know the back one. That's pretty clear. But actually, it's the middle one that's producing the change. And if any of you know the finance industry, the middle office has always been where the intelligent computer systems that decide buying and selling and whatever sit. Transactional outcomes at the back, people doing strange, mysterious things at the front, but the intelligence that makes them understand the market and determine the actions is in the middle office. Is this new? Well, actually, no. Geoffrey Moore, who some of you may know, very famous author of predicting change, crossing the chasm and so on, he first introduced this conceptual model in 2011. The change factor is more the reality of the technology capability to do it. And right now, it is there, and the early adopters are moving through taking this kind of model and making it work. So let's have a look at this in a conceptual way. Here's a manufacturing company, okay? At the front, it's got systems of engagement, the market, opportunities, who wants to buy something, do something. And at the back, it's got the everyday, what capabilities have I got to respond? Are my machines overloaded in this area? Can I do it? So we get the input signals, and we're getting from this side, what's the machinery, the factory loading. From this side, what's the market opportunity? And in the middle, we're trying to make an intelligent assessment by using machine learning and AI of how do I match up these diversities. And from that, we hopefully can make an offer back on this side to interact with the market and optimize our opportunity of closing a good deal. A good deal doesn't just mean we cut the price, it means we looked at our factory position, our loading, overhead recovery, anything you like, to decide where a good deal lay for us and the event. And if they accept the good deal, then it comes back and we have to move into a commercial transaction and we have to go through the book-to-bill sequence of issuing orders, etc. That's the model between front office, engagement model, back office, record model, middle office, intelligence model. So, whatever reason, it's not wanting to turn on one. Ah, there it goes. So my third key message, therefore, is understand that model. It's very easy to find out quite a lot about it. Just go Google systems of engagement is usually the quickest way to get it. And you will find a lot of information about what that model really means, and you'll find a lot of opinion pieces from all the major tech vendors on how they see it applying, etc. And just remember that it enables us to understand this. So I'm not saying a middle office is a huge number of people and a huge infrastructure. It's not. It's merely the focusing point where you bring all of this together to make it work. The problem is that this brings us to a very big conflict on righteousness. IT people could rightly say that they've saved many enterprises from themselves when they have gone off in different directions and they failed to observe the needs for anything from security to stateful data to anything else. But if you look at the way this has changed, what do we mean by architecture? Well, up at the top there, it was pretty well 2010, yeah, we know this one. 2013, and then look at 2017. Before we jump to well-crafted definition, we should think about this one again. That's the impact that the shift from enterprise architecture around stateful close-coupled to stateless loose-coupled business architecture brings. So what exactly does that mean? Well, let's look at this in a slightly different way over the next couple of slides. Here's your air conditioner company. Okay, well that's easy, they sell it as a service, keep the temperature at a given level. Let's understand the impact of this. And let's think about this one as, oddly enough, GE and Westinghouse have. What that actually means is when they design an air conditioner for the current market of selling the product, they know a price point and they know a feature point to compete. But what happens if they don't sell the product? They continue to own it and they're going to have to operate it. They know perfectly well that half the features will never be taken into account. And maintainability is kind of there, but it's not that important. If they're going to continue to own it and operate it, maintainability, reliability, they're all at the forefront of the design. The design changes. You don't sell on specmanship. You sell on the life cycle they will get out of the machine when they own it and continue to own it. And instead, you have other questions. Financial management. Your business model is based on selling things, now it's based on owning them and charging services. It's a big change. So the edge-based financial models look quite a bit different from the center one. But your manufacturing plant looks hugely different because you don't manufacture a standard range of models that you send out to be stocked by dealers. You manufacture the optimum machine for the contracts you're looking at. So flexible manufacturing becomes a huge part of this model. And you design base units with the ability to be very flexible for which building you deploy them in. So let's now look at the how do you understand what's going on? Well, we now talk about forces. So over here, here's the traditional model from a long time back that any business school student can talk about in their sleep. Porter's 5 forces defining a market. It's 30, 40 years old. Let's think about that, and let's talk about, in our ERP structure, purchasing and what changes. Well, if we went back to the dawn of ERP and we went back to people actually being networked and having PCs and client server, the realization was that a purchasing department of maybe 10 active buyers sometimes was very good, but sometimes it didn't work out. So we came to what would be the best practice that would, in most cases, get us the best result. And we captured that in a fixed process, and it's worked. But if you actually applied that thinking to it, there's a whole series of forces going on in purchasing. So if we were able to capture and define those forces so that we could reuse them in other parts of the business, much like we do with current architecture models, and we understood what they stood for, this is how we start to make machine learning look at these subjects and then start to apply AI in order to make them work. Okay, so it's not static and process, it's where is there dynamics that would have the biggest impact on the business, which is where we go to look at machine learning and using increased intelligence. And of course, part of that is where do we get data flows that enable us to do it. So, 4th key message. We have to rethink architectural models. We don't abandon the principle. The original and oldest principle in all of this is you better understand what something stands for. You know, the old joke, if you go back to retail for a moment, what exactly is a unit? Is it an end piece you sell? Is it an outer, an inner, a carton? You know, that everything has to have a clear enough definition that it can be shared and reused. Well, so do all these forces. Many of the forces have to be clearly defined so you know when you grind them together in these models, what did you put in? Because that obviously affects what you get out. And of course, when you reuse forces in multiple models, you better be talking about the same thing. So it's not throw away the principles by which we understand architecture, it's redefine the principles that we understand in architecture, expand them if you like, to be able to take some of these areas on. Because our business will look like a series of pools of activity, each of which can be intelligently optimized and then put together with an overall optimization. So don't think it's the big picture and we change the whole company at once. Anybody who did transformation last time round is not going to agree to jump up and take both feet off the ground at the same time. The path will be taking the areas where this change will have the maximum benefit and starting to apply them there, and gradually it will move across the enterprise. If you can grab the area of highest impact, you will obviously have the biggest impact on value to deployment to the business. Right across every sector, unbundling is occurring. This is one because we will mostly know these. In other words, the big is better, make a lot of it, have a great process model is breaking down rapidly. Here in the UK, a great example of that is 2 years ago, Schweppes would have been described as invincible. Fever Tree took them apart. If you're a gin and tonic drinker, you know Fever Tree. And they took them apart very, very quickly. 2 years, isn't it? About 2 years to get to being an 800 million business. That's how quickly these tipping points are occurring now. So retail has been one mainly because of our change in activity. So my 5th key message is we're already getting a lot of this change. And we're already seeing research from universities and other things which are looking at it and saying companies who grasp these principles and got it into the right places have actually seen a really big change. But you will notice in that it's not abandoning what we know, it's complementing what we know and extending your competitiveness into a totally different area. If you do that, the average difference that the universities have found that studied this and business schools is 15%. 15% is a lot. Think about the last range of IoT projects that you drove, IT projects you drove. We are scrapping now for impacts at low percentage with relatively high investment. So when you start talking about these kind of levels of change, you will see that is what takes someone and transfers them away, or it's what renders them uncompetitive if one of these new unbundled companies comes in and operates in a different way. That is a lot to have taken in 25 minutes. Personally, I'm happy that the slides are made available to you. And hopefully that has tried to bring together a number of things that are running around in your mind and are running around out there. We've probably got time for about 1 or 2 questions, if anyone's brave enough.
Yeah, it's a question really about the middle office.
Yeah.
And it would appear in the UK that actually we're a little bit backward on actually setting up middle office in businesses in general. And is it the fact that they can't get the budget, they can't resource?
I wouldn't say backward. That's a bit unkind. There are some very good examples running around in the UK. I think the biggest challenge at the moment is that if you take it from boardroom down, there's so many pressures going on at the moment that when IT walks in and says, have I got a technical solution for you? And by the way, it's going to cost while we do it. There's too many other pressures, too many other ways they're being forced to spend money at the moment. And part of the discipline behind it is if you introduce this concept of systems of engagement and then how do I treat it, it suddenly becomes rationally part of the change they understand. It's when you position it from the back forward, it doesn't make sense because their concentration is very much on the change factor of how they're doing business. Relate it to that and it tends to work.
In organisations though, the actual technical representatives don't seem to be able to convince the financial people to release budget by presenting them with business plans, proper things that would convince them that there is good payback in a very short time. So, that is an area that obviously a lot of companies need to realise.
Actually, I would take it the other way around.
When you're trying to push at the board level?
I would take it the other way around. Okay, how many of you in IT? How many of you adore what the business is doing with Salesforce? Okay, there we go. Right, nobody put their hand up. Why? Because Salesforce is doing things around the edge, and to the business manager concerned, it's great. And I'm not going to say it's not great, but there is the next stage of the game missing that says if you are doing that around the edge, if you've got a stateless IT model, you're kind of like, hang on a minute, you're breaking it up. When you start to think in this manner of implying a stateless model that couples when you will, it makes it different. So I haven't detailed it, but one of the huge things in that is the thing of the thing of decentralized ledger synchronization, which is a better name for blockchain than blockchain, because you'll realize that the integration around the edge is actually around that, where you say the ledger in the activity may be updated, but I don't actually need to update that ledger in a stateful way. I can pass it through when I need it. So it's when you can get that all together, you suddenly get a different view to give to business. At the moment, the discoupling between a Salesforce-y type edgy stuff and an IT bit is too great. You've got to introduce this mid-piece that makes the value statement. Okay, right, I think we're probably out of time. I'm happy to chat to anyone outside if they want to for a minute. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm sorry if I made it hard work, but it's a complex subject.